Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Simple Watch Reviews, where I review simple watches in a straightforward way. Today my review of the new Watchdives WD5513 No Date sub. I think this might be my favourite sub homage yet. So this is a new release from Watchdives, the latest in their WD5513 range of Submariner homages. You can get it right now on their website with an early bird discount for $179, which I think is an absolute bargain. I'll talk you through the details of the watch in this video and tell you why it is for me very close to being the perfect Submariner homage. As usual, I'll include some indoor footage, some outdoor footage and some macro footage, all filmed in 4K, so you can really get up close and personal with the watch and you don't just have to take my word for things. I've owned countless Submariner homages over the years. I just can't keep away from them. There's something about that classic design that just keeps on calling me back. So I've owned most of the ones you could probably think of, from more recent ones like the San Martin Water Ghost to the classic Steinhardt Ocean 1. I've had a Devosa Turnos. I've had several Invicta 8926s. I had an Orient Submariner homage years ago. I even had the Raven Vintage Sub homage at one point. And back in my early days of collecting watches, I had several Alpha Submariner homages. Alpha were, if you remember them, the kind of OG Chinese homage brand back in the day. And recently I've reviewed some more up-to-date sub homages on the channel. So the Millifortic D100, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and two other variants in the WD5513 line from Watchdives. So they're two different mill sub homages. But this one, the new No Date sub, I think for me is close to being the perfect Submariner. There is one thing that I'm slightly not sure about, and I will talk about that later on in the video, but this really does pretty much everything right for me. I really think they've nailed what I look for in a sub. So let me talk firstly about the differences between this watch and the two mill subs, because on paper they look very similar, and in fact I thought that they were very similar apart from the bezels, the dials and the hands, but there is actually one other difference. So I'd assumed that the case here was going to be identical to the two mill sub cases, but it's not. It's the same size, but the side of the case is polished rather than brushed, and because of that, I don't know if this is some kind of optical illusion, but it appears to me that the case is slightly slimmer as a result. I don't think it actually is. I think it just looks that way, but that polished side really does look quite fantastic and gives the watch a slightly dressier look. So aside from that, this is closer to the more modern looking version of the mill subs, the one with the BGW9 Lume, the top hat crystal and the on the fly adjustable clasp. So this watch has all of those. It has that fantastic top hat crystal, it has the wonderful on the fly clasp, and it also has BGW9. So rather than the applied indices of the mill sub, this has a completely printed dial, so that lume is layered directly onto the dial, and that gives it a slightly less refined look, which I really like. I think they've pretty much perfected it here. The dial layout is exactly the same, so the same classic Submariner shaped indices, the same Watchdives logo below the 12, and then just two lines of text above the 6. But whereas with those applied indices the layout didn't quite work for me, here I think it looks absolutely fantastic, and I can't explain why. I just think it works. The other two differences on this one are the bezel insert and the hand. So an aluminium bezel insert again, but with the minute markers just going up to the 15 in the classic Submariner style rather than going all the way around the bezel. And the hand are Mercedes hands rather than the sword hands of the mill sub. And what that means for the bezel is you can really see how fantastic this bezel looks. It's a lovely rich matte black. The mill sub bezel is actually exactly the same colour, but because of all the minute markers, there's a lot of silver on it as well, and I hadn't appreciated quite how rich and appealing the black of the bezel is. Okay, so let me cover the dimensions then. So 38mm in diameter, so smaller than many sub homages, and that's one of the things that really appeals to me about this one and about the mill subs as well. That slightly smaller size means it wears fantastically if, like me, you've got a smaller wrist. So 38mm in diameter, but with a 40mm bezel. It's about 47mm lug to lug and 12.7mm thick, including that big top hat crystal. The lug width is 20mm and those lugs are drilled to make it easier to do strap changes. There's a nice big crown as well, very grippy and guarded by some rounded crown guards which work very well. They don't get in the way when you are trying to wind the watch, but equally they do give the crown a decent amount of protection. The crown is a screw down crown and the watch has 200 meters of water resistance. The crystal, as I've said, is this lovely top hat sapphire crystal which looks absolutely wonderful. And inside you've got the Chinese ETA 2824 clone, the PT5000, so a hacking, hand-winding automatic movement. The bracelet is a nice solid affair, so 20mm at the lugs, tapering down to 16 at the clasp, screwed links, very nicely articulated, and as I say, the on-the-fly clasp on this is really easy to use, and it's not too big either. It ends up being about the same length as the head of the watch, so balances things out nicely. The finish on this, as on the two mil subs, is of a very high standard. So as I said, the sides of the case are polished rather than brushed like they are on the mil subs. That polish is very nicely done. You also get a lovely polished chamfer on the edge of the case between the sides and the top. The tops are brushed, as is the top of the bracelet. Sides of the bracelet are polished. The clasp is brushed all over, aside from a gorgeous polished chamfer running down the edges. The crystal is just lovely, and I prefer it on this watch than on the modern style mil sub. On that, because it's a military style watch, I felt like the top hat crystal was maybe a little bit too much, but on this watch I think it works absolutely beautifully. It's a joy to look at the watch from angles and see just how much that crystal protrudes, but equally it never gets in the way of the legibility of the dial. And the dial is gorgeous too, a rich matte black like the bezel insert, and very simple. One of the criticisms I had of the modern mil sub was that it felt like it was a bit too monochrome, but on this watch it just works. And again, I'm not sure why that is, but I think it looks close to perfect. And now we get to the only criticism I have of the watch, and that's the minute hand. I feel like the minute hand is a tiny bit too slim, only like a hair too slim, but it looks to me ever so slightly slimmer than it should be. Now that said, it's always completely legible. I've never had any problem telling the time on this watch, and the lume is really well applied as well. So BGW9 lume, which glows very brightly indeed. My new way of testing lume is to give the watch a bit of a charge with a UV torch before I go to bed and check that I can still tell the time at 5 o'clock in the morning the next day. And with this watch I absolutely can, so top marks for the lume. And like on the mil subs, the bezel action is excellent. So the bezel is super grippy, it's nice and clicky as well, and there's hardly any play in it at all. So aside from that slight quibble about the minute hand, there's really nothing I can fault about the finishing of this watch. But it's really the overall design that has won me over with it. There's just something about the No Date sub. I'm someone who doesn't actually mind cyclopses on watches, especially as my eyes get older. I do quite like having a bit of help with the date window. But generally speaking, I do prefer No Date watches. I think there's just something cleaner about them, and there's a wonderful simplicity to this watch. It's so gloriously unfussy, and yet the finishing elevates it a little bit. So it is slightly dressy with the polished sides, the big top hat crystal. It's a little bit showy, but equally in the things that matter, the things that are about telling the time, it's utter simplicity. You've got that gorgeous matte black dial, you've got the classic bezel insert, which is so much less fussy than the one with the minute markers all the way around on the mil subs. Everything just comes together beautifully in this watch. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Clearly a lot of that is down to personal taste, so do let me know what you think in the comments. What is your perfect Submariner? Anyway, I will leave things there. Do give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and please consider subscribing for more simple watch reviews.